Welcome, everyone. Let's see here. All right, welcome to Herbs for Your Last Nerve. This is the third and final class in our free series, and it's the Mercury in retrograde editions. So if there's computer glitches, then we'll know why, right? So let me introduce myself real quick. My name is John Goicovich, and I am an herbalist and the co-director of Green Path Herb School. And I've been studying and admiring plants and herbs for a long time now, since the mid-90s. And a little bit about me is that I found my direction, so to speak, my path in the mid-90s, and was lucky enough to have a mentor, an herb mentor, who guided me and supported me a bit. And then Saturn return hit for me, and I moved from California, where I lived, and I went to the Rocky Mountains. And I attended over several years 2 different herb schools, and that changed my life. I knew what I wanted to do. That was very solidified when that happened. And then I met my partner, my wife, and co-director of Green Path Herb School at Herb School. So after we attended 2 herb schools, we moved up to Missoula in the Rocky Mountains of Montana, and we opened a store and started an herbal products company. And we did all kinds of stuff. We did retail and wholesale, made products. And one thing we did right from the beginning was teach. And that was always something we really enjoyed. So we did that for a while. We learned a lot. Mistakes were made, and just when you own your own business, it's a journey. I learned as much there as possibly an herb school in that field of doing stuff with herbs. And after about 18 years of retail, we kind of got burned out a little bit, and then we sold the business in 2013, and that was the genesis of Green Path Herb School. Like I said, we've been teaching for a while, but then we could really realize our path, if you will, or our passion. And ever since then, we've been offering all kinds of classes and programs. Let me share the screen here on this slideshow here. So here we go with our topic tonight, which I'm going to explain in a minute. But I wanted to also just show you about our school, a little plug about it. We do have programs starting in 2021. We're just finishing up our 2020 programs. So right now there's a early bird special on our main program, and then we're developing self-paced pre-recorded classes as well. And everything's going to be online for 2021. And we typically have done a mix of that and in-house. So we'll see where that goes. But you can learn about all this stuff at greenpathherbschool.com. And feel free to give us a call or an email regarding any questions you have about that, any of our programs, and we'd be happy to talk more about it with you. Okay. Enough about me and the school. Let's get into this. Now, this is a topic, nervous system, the nervous system and herbs. This is a topic that's pretty huge. I've taught this before as a workshop. This could easily be a full weekend workshop. And I've also taught it as a 3-hour class. I've taught it as a 2-hour class. I have yet to teach it as a 1-hour class, so buckle up. One thing I'm going to try to do is I want to set up some stuff and talk about the nervous system a little bit, but I want to focus. Our main thing is going to be about which herbs to get to know for nervous system stuff. But a few things about what this class is and what it isn't. This is not, we're in, especially in 1 hour, we're not going to talk about chronic nerve pain or neuropathies. We're not going to talk about like fibromyalgia in depth or anything. We're also not going to talk about migraines or headaches in any depth, and any kind of serious depression, bipolar stuff. And although we'll mention insomnia, we're not going to really talk any length about sleep disorders and stuff. What this class is herbs that will help with the blues, mild anxiety and panic attacks, feeling burned out, restoring some emotional support and resilience, and just general nervousness or nervous tension. So the other thing about the pace of this class at an hour is that usually I stop after different sections and ask questions, but I'm going to go full on until a little before class is supposed to end at 7. And then so post your questions in the chat or the comments or the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So like I said, we're going to keep it on the plants, but just know, and this is obvious, that any kind of stress reduction protocol would involve a lot of things. Counseling, perhaps, yoga, meditation, proper nutrition, exercise. All that stuff is critically important, and herbs are just part of that. Getting out and what's called forest bathing or naturescaping, and plants are part of nature, so we can use them personally and viscerally, but also being in their habitat and their midst is really important, I think, for a lot of people. This is a class to help with chilling and nourishing and building our reserves. And we're not going to talk about any herbs that some people use for study aids or kind of like a Red Bull substitute. So we're going to go over the nervous system very quickly, and then we're going to talk a little bit about stress responses and how we accommodate stress. I realize I'm talking a little fast now. I think I'll slow down a little bit when we get to the herbs, and a little bit about how people are wired, constitutionally it's called, and the actions of what kind of categories of herbs will help with some of these stress symptoms. And the final part of class will be that materia medica, and that's the study of a substance used for healing. And that's where we're going to take a deeper dive into some individual herbs. And I can guarantee I probably won't cover every herb that is a favorite of yours that you use for relieving nervous tension. There's just so many, but I'll talk about some that I have some good insight about and that are popular. So herbs have what are called actions, and actions are our attempt to notice what the herb does in the body and put them in categories or boxes. And herbs have many actions, and they have nuances. So they might have primary actions and then secondary actions, which of course I realize can sound confusing, but it's also kind of the magic of herbs. And the exciting part is those nuances, those secondary actions that can really allow you to fine tune some herbs for a certain person or a certain condition. And there's also energetics. Energetics are, I guess you could say, the qualities of those actions. Is something drying or moistening or warming or cooling, and that doesn't always mean temperature. I mean to function. We're going to talk about 3 main categories or actions tonight. We're going to talk about adaptogens, trophorestoratives, which is a long word that some people just call tonics, and nervines. And that's probably what we're going to spend the most time on. Nervines are a favorite of mine category-wise but they're also the biggest challenge. And I'll just note that the nervous system can be kind of wonky for people. You've heard of paradoxical reactions, like let's say to Benadryl, for instance. Some people get really tired when they take Benadryl, and some people get very wired, a paradoxical reaction. My own personal example is that my brother and I, if I drink any caffeinated substance past 1 p.m., I'm done. I don't sleep well. And even though he gets similar uplift from caffeinated beverages, coffee and tea, he can drink it at 11 p.m. and go to sleep and nothing bothers him. So we're all wired different. And in studying these nervines over time, that's just been reinforced time and time again. Sometimes you can predict how someone's going to react to nervines, and sometimes it's just a surprise and a head scratcher, and that just comes with it. It's a challenge, and I kind of like that. So let's catch our breath for a minute. And now this part, don't feel like you need to write it down or anything. Maybe just sit and absorb it. And for some of you, it may be more than you want to absorb. And some of you, oh yeah, I know that already, but I like to kind of go with the flow as we approach the herbs. And so I just want to talk about our nervous system super quick. We have our central nervous system, and that's primarily the brain and spinal cord. And then we have our peripheral nervous system. And really what we might focus on a little bit in our talking about herb is the autonomic, or you've heard of the sympathetic and parasympathetic. And the sympathetic is that fight or flight, running from the saber-toothed tiger kind of thing. And the parasympathetic is more relax, repair, and digestion. And so, a lot of ways to think about it is what happens when you get adrenalized and sympathetic. Respiration goes up, blood goes to the skeletal muscle, you're ready to do an action. What happens in parasympathetic? Maybe more digestive juices and function, and sleep or relaxation, things like that. And we have a lot going on all the time of both of those, and balancing that out. There's also the enteric nervous system, also called the intrinsic nervous system, and that's considered a branch of the autonomic nervous system, but it is all that innervation in our gut. A lot of neurotransmitters are stored, serotonin especially, 80 to 90% of the serotonin we have in our body is stored there. It is an emerging field too in some areas. I think it was Psychology Today had a cover story about the enteric nervous system and treating, doing psychiatric and psychology good work with, working on digestive system and paying attention to the enteric nervous system. And we all know how certain foods are grounding too and can influence mood. So it makes a lot of sense. And then finally, the limbic system, which is part of the central nervous system. It's kind of our ancient brain, our emotional brain. It has a lot to do with what's called the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. And where that comes into play with our talk tonight is one of our categories, adaptogens, deal with that. All right, let this soak in and relax you. A little field of lupin. So what's fascinating is, and all animals do this too, but it's, us humans, we have quite a few ways that we accommodate or adapt to stress. And that can be long-term stress or short stress. And that, of course, or short-term stress, and that could turn into patterns. And we're always trying to maintain balance or homeostasis. But sometimes if we don't fix a situation or we're working on stuff, we can kind of go sideways. We can develop patterns that aren't sustainable and aren't healthy. One of my teachers always used to say that, maintaining your stress is kind of like having a bank account. And if you do too much that's hard on you, you wake up the next day overdrawn, whether that's, 6 hours or, 3 hours of sleep or a hangover or whatever it is, and you move slowly and methodically the next day and adjust. And that's, short-term stuff, but long-term we do this too. And we get into patterns where then chronic disorders can come into play, chronic stress, but also think of it this way: when you have adrenergic or adrenal dominance, sympathetic dominance, some parts of your body, tissues and stuff are getting fed more than others. So you might have skeletal muscle excess, hypertonicity, and lousy digestion, because that's just the way you're working self and then where your blood's going. And that's some long term, even if there's at first subtle effects of that kind of stuff. And then, so let's talk about what is stress, or stressors. Of course, some obvious things: moving, death in the family, accident or trauma, holiday shopping coming up, gosh, politics, COVID, tax audits. Okay, so hopefully I'm not stressing a bunch of you out right now. But even the good stuff, the quote unquote good stuff, a new job, getting married, having a child, going on a trip, that kind of thing. Our body can react kind of similarly to some of these things, whether they're quote unquote good or bad. And some of that stuff is immediate, our symptoms, like maybe heart palpitations or anxiety or panic attacks. Some of them are over time, like you're grouchy or you are confused with a lack of focus, things like that. Or nervous tension sets in, like, oh God, my shoulders are always in my ears, and I have tension all the time, and that's a sign what we're not maybe resolving. And so lots of things. Sometimes OCD habits come. We all kind of have OCD, in my opinion, a little bits, but maybe when you're really stressed and you're not grounded, you're maybe doing weird things like, opening up doors and shutting it 7 times, a cabinet door or whatever. I've seen that stuff happen. But that sympathetic stuff, that fight or flight, what some people don't realize and kind of have to think of different, is it can also be a persistent state of alertness. And what does that feel like? That might be circular thinking, some of those OCD habits, physical tension, grinding teeth. That could also be perceived or described as maybe an edge. And that edge is kind of controversial. Some of us like that edge or use that edge to get things done, myself included. I like to cultivate a little edge myself, but that can get out of hand and not sustainable. One thing I've noticed too, when using herbs or other substances too, to combat stress, one has to be careful about people who really have cultivated and maintained that edge, because not everyone responds favorably to you messing with their edge. And so sometimes it's good when you're getting into this, trying to relieve some stress. Of course, as I said before, all kinds of different modalities, and for goodness sake, try to reduce the cause of the stress. But go easy on the herbs. Maybe you want to start with chamomile or lemon balm, because not everyone reacts favorably to being, like a small nail in a sledgehammer herb wise. And I've seen people react unfavorably and to just, they don't want to be sedated. They don't want to lose that edge, but maybe they really want to make headway that way. Some people also do the extremes: coffee all day, maybe alcohol or cannabis at night. They prop themselves up, sleeping pills. And, a lot of us are there or have been there with that kind of stuff. Excuse me. And the other thing before we get into herbal actions is to remember that we're all different and we have different constitutions. That's, purely beyond the scope of this 1 hour class. But why do you give the same herb to different people and they react differently? Well, part of that is constitution. Those herbal secondary actions can come into play. I'll give you a quick example. Valerian is, for most people, a central nervous system sedative, and it does a lot of other things too. But one of the things for some people, it tends to stimulate maybe gastrointestinal or cardiovascular function a little bit. And if those people are what we call excess in those areas, then what they might find is that they can get to sleep, but they'll have a lousy night's sleep. So that's just a little example of some of the intricacies that can come up for things. And almost all the healing modalities that I can think of, natural alternative healing modalities, Ayurveda, Western herbalism, traditional Chinese medicine, have things like that, energetics and constitutions that further delineate, how and when to use things. Ultimately, it's all about homeostasis and balance. Okay, let's talk about herbal actions. So let's see where we're at. We're doing good on time. The first one, nervines. These are herbs that act on the nervous system. And of course, this can be broader about, nerve, like I talked about different neuropathies and stuff like that, but that's beyond the scope of this class. What we're going to talk about is nervous system, as far as how you handle stress. So these can be relaxing nervines, a little bit more stimulating or uplifting, or nutritive, sort of like herbs is food. And what we're going to do is just blaze through this part, but I'm going to share some herbs that you might be familiar with, and indeed some that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So what I would call, and some of these herbs are in different categories. Oat seed can be in relaxant and stimulating and nutritive. So there are herbs that delve in all that stuff. Oat seed is a really good one. SKULLCAP, nice relaxant. And I kind of made this list in order of its more gentle, supportive, and then the bottom of the list, more sedating or, overtly relaxing. So when you get down to valerian and hops, those for most folks are, are good for insomnia or really dropping you down a notch or two. Again, you don't always know how someone's going to react with a nervine. And really, I'd say with most new remedies, I have the motto of low and slow. Go for the lower end dose and take it slow and see how you do. Some that are more on the stimulating, again, oat seed can do it all kind of. Mint, like peppermint, spearmint. Sometimes if you have some tea like that, you get a little uplift and it clears your thoughts a little bit. And again, listed in its strength, I would say, with coffee and black tea being overtly stimulating, especially to the central nervous system. Some things on this list, like prickly ash, are a little bit more peripheral nervous system, like we talked about, more body than central nervous system. But nervines are kind of, it really depends. But if you're working on stuff, you might use nervines and adaptogens and even other tonics or trophorestoratives. Some herbalists like to get in there with the nervines first, so take care of some of the palliative stuff, if it's, panic attacks and stuff like that. And, work at it from different angles and then also use some other herbs in a different manner and build up the nervous system. Adaptogens. Dun, dun, dun. So some of you have heard this, some of you may have not. It is actually a relatively new term. As far as I can find out, originally coined in the late 40s and kind of used in practice in the late 60s. Apparently, Russia was at the forefront of that, developing it for either Olympic athletes and or super soldiers, if that's to be believed. But basically, they're herbs and substances that increase resistance to non-specific stress. So it's different stress like workload, heat, noise, lack of sleep, stuff like that. Um, Most adaptogens are non-toxic and balancing to physiology. The official description of adaptogens are those substances that work on the HPA or hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. So basically, it's stuff that's elicits a response from the adrenals, our adrenal glands do a lot of things, but the mineral corticoids and glucocorticoids and stuff like that, but cortisol. So cortisol is known as the stress hormone. We all need some of it, but some of us have too much of that. And a lot of these adaptogens, since they work on the adrenal function, tend to be balancing to blood sugar a little bit. Not for diabetes, I'm not talking about that, but just shifts in blood sugar, and that can be from adrenaline, sympathetic overload, and also the way some people eat to maintain their edge. Some people, have potato chips and grapes and sodas and stuff like that, carb centric, and that's how they feed their fuel. And using adaptogen doesn't, you know, mitigate that necessarily, but it's one of the tools to use. And and a lot of times with long-term stress, looking at diet and nutrition is of course obviously important. But adaptogens, they're interesting. They're different from nervines. Nervines are usually calming or uplifting. Adaptogens get in there and work on that hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, and they help. It's been described as helping you beat yourself up less. It involves the limbic system, and that's a whole complicated thing to get into. But some of these herbs you'll recognize as being adaptogens. Another note about adaptogens, they're heavily marketed, so the herb industry is not immune to hype. So I've seen some things, that I don't consider an adaptogen being called an adaptogen because it's a nice marketing buzzword. But here we have ginseng, either American ginseng or Chinese ginseng, either one of the panaxes, ashwagandha from Ayurveda, holy basil or tulsi from Ayurveda, and eleuthero, which is also called Siberian ginseng. So you have a number of these plants, and there are other ones too, being used for long-term stress and as an adaptogen, adapting to stress. They are typically taken a little differently than nervines. You can take a nervine long-term, but adaptogens, that's kind of where they shine, as long-term use. Okay, save the little more complicated for last here of these three actions. Trophorestoratives, some people call these tonics. An interesting thing about trophorestoratives is what's trophorestorative to one person might not be to another, or might be irritating to someone else. It is kind of gets specific. So nutritive or restorative to a system. So the system could be the nervous system or respiratory system. An organ could be the lungs. The tissue could be any number of mucous membranes, or even smooth muscle or things like that. So there's a variety of herbs that have an affinity for a certain system, organ, or tissue. And there are some nervous system trophorestoratives. They tend to build strength and function. And the reason they're different than adaptogens or nervines is because they really focus on it, how we classify them as a system, organ, or tissue. And if you have respiratory or a system or organ or tissue weakness, that's when you would use these. So it really is more specific to a person. Some examples: Nettle seed in particular, the leaf a little bit too, but they is a good kidney and adrenal trophorestorative. Two herbs we're going to talk about tonight, oat seed and skullcap, trophorestoratives for the nervous system. But then I threw in another example here, milk thistle for the liver, or hawthorn for cardiovascular. And hawthorn also is a nervine though, especially the flower and leaf is calming and really good for, grief and stuff like that. And American ginseng, of course, is a premier adaptogen. Here's what I would say, any questions and stuff, but go ahead and type away in the Q&A. I'll take a little sip here. Check the time, we're good. And now, let that soak in for a minute and do a shoulder roll. That is my son contemplating something in Glacier National Park. That's Prairie Lake in the Two Medicine area. So right there, I hope that drops some people's blood pressure a little bit or get you settled in. All right, we're doing well on schedule, and I apologize if I talked fast and rushed through that other stuff. I just wanted to get to this part, and hopefully you did absorb that and have a little bit background noise with it to further it when we talk about this stuff. So materia medica, again, is a Latin term for the study of any substance used for healing. So we're going to talk particularly about some herbal nervines. And the way I'm going to present these, and I do this in our main course and stuff, is what are called monographs, where we do kind of a deep dive. It's not going to be as deep as I would otherwise do, because we're going to focus on the nervous system attributes of these plants, even though they might have other and do have other attributes like, antiviral or anti-inflammatory and things like that. While I might mention those, that's not what we're focusing on. The first is one of my favorites, and if you kind of subscribe to the thought of herbal allies, as herbs being support and almost friends and just, something you can count on. For me, and this might be different for other people, lemon balm is such an herb. I don't take it every day, but it's there when I need it, and I've cultivated a good relationship with it. That being said, of course, it doesn't work the same or sometimes work at all on other people. But I'm quite enamored with this plant, and it's one of my favorites. It's in the Lamiaceae or mint family, and it has the opposite leaves and square stem, typical of mints, and but it's a little different because most of the time it doesn't have a substantial stem like the other mints, and it has a lovely smell and taste, but it's a little sour, which is a little bit unusual for a mint. They mostly taste aromatic and smell aromatic in different ways. So here I just give you a little habitat. These are from the USDA maps, so apologies to anyone out of the United States. I don't have that kind of habitat information, but it's from the Mediterranean, a perennial plant, which means it lives multiple years. But it has escaped cultivation in the United States. It's been naturalized. If you can find it wild, it might be stronger. So, but if you're growing it yourself in your garden, one thing to consider is to grow it don't pamper it. So it's been called like grow it rasty. So the volatile oils that are responsible for some of this plant's actions are way stronger when it's in the wild or when you don't pamper it. So if you have it well watered and in the shade, it's probably going to be weaker medicine. We have our lemon balm south facing by our beehives, outside the garden proper, so it doesn't get direct watering. It just gets, once in a while we'll put a soaker hose on it, and then when rains come. But it is stronger, and it actually really thrives that way. Our lemon balm patch is, pretty big, and it likes that full sun, and that kind of environmental stress is good for those volatile oils. It is lovely as a tea or a tincture or a glycerite. And there's other uses. Of course, you could make a vinegar out of it, or make a tea and freeze it in popsicles and stuff. But the main things you're going to bump up against are tea and tincture or glycerite. Wonderful tea. I mean, really tasty, whether you do a standard infusion, which is just hot water on the tea, or you do a sun tea. One of my favorite things, one of my favorite teas, and it has a pleasant taste. And for me, and a lot of the students have kind of echoed this, and I'm sure everyone has, can probably relate to this. It is mildly calming, and it just kind of opens you up a little bit. You feel just a little, if you're a little stressed, you just feel a little detached from that. And it's a bit of a mood elevator. Here's some of the medicinal actions. We'll talk about a few of these. It's kind of a skip in your step, a little bit of, if it's effervescent. It's got a personality, the tea, a mild pick me up. And for some people, they don't feel that. It's really subtle, but it just, it kind of brightens the mood, brightens your eyes. The tincture does that as well, but the tincture is a little different, and maybe in some regards stronger, but it will sometimes be a little bit more relaxing and almost sedating. Again, it depends on the person. So it can be especially a relaxing nervine in the tincture, especially in a little higher doses. Anodyne just means pain relieving. Antiviral, a little bit externally, and diaphoretic is to induce a sweat. So it just makes you sweat, kind of like peppermint wood or ginger. So it can help with mild mania or panic attacks. The tincture might be stronger for that, but just to chill out, like if you were caught and not grounded, caught up in yourself and overthinking things, the same way someone would be like, hey, why don't you focus on your breath, or take a walk, or meditate, or something like that, or take some rescue remedy. You could also fit in, hey, how about a cup of lemon balm tea for that? Gives you pause. And it's really good as a nervine for people who are kind of chronically pissed off, or people who are constantly ruminating a retort, like, overthinking things and going, oh, I should have said this, how dare they, and they're kind of stuck feeling. This is also a good one for when I talked about those people that have an edge, that don't like you to move things too fast. Lemon balm. Some people that have that edge might not feel the effects of lemon balm, but those lucky ones that do, that subtlety, it's a nice way to start to put them in that direction. Sensitivity to pain, or sensitivity to, and that could be sensitivity to a lot of things, like your shirt tag or anything like that. Maybe lemon balm tea or tincture can just lessen that a little bit, give you some space from that. It's a good antioxidant. It's high in rosmarinic acid and other things. One thing that I had read about that I tried and with some success was its use in jet lag. And some people think jet lag is, in least in part, a phenomenon of airborne free radicals. So, we don't have time to go into that, but you could look it up. But as an antioxidant, it would help with that. And I took it on a trip one time where we had many layovers, and I took it during the flight and afterwards. And, it's somewhat anecdotal because I don't, I haven't done it enough times, but I had enough result from it that is a travel companion for me. And I really enjoyed it. And I thought, I don't need an excuse to take lemon balm. Although like I said, I don't take it every day. It's just such a great remedy. Why wouldn't you take it on a flight with you? The tincture would be better because it's, easy to transport, and you can just, take it anywhere. Nervousness and overexcitation, especially with kids, lemon balm tea for kids, or the glycerite. There's a brand called Herbs for Kids. They make liquid extracts, glycerites, and they use lemon balm a lot. I think they're still in business. They're fantastic, with our kids. It's just really great. That and homeopathic remedies were gentle but sure of a, effect. They really worked well. Head colds, even, it's nice, especially as a hot tea, because it has that diaphoretic action of getting you sweat and getting things moving. Another thing that I've noticed about lemon balm and talk to other people about is in Chinese medicine, you have other certain herbs that are used in formulas that are called harmonizers, and they tend to have a formula really work well, and plants, work well with each other, and they kind of synergize things and harmonize things. So licorice is a popular herb as a harmonizer in TCM. But in the world of nervines, if you're making a nervine or nervous system formula, I think lemon balm is fantastic for that. By itself, it's great with all its subtleties, but in a formula, whether it's tea or tincture, really good for, it just seems to bond together with other herbs, so I really recommend that. Especially if you're just not sure what to put in it. You're kind of like, oh, I want to put some other nervines, just, throw some lemon balm in there and see what happens. I think you might be pleased with that. It's an aromatic mint. So it does, get things moving with smooth muscles. So it's potential that could bring on menses and act as what's called an emmenagogue, which brings on blood flow and menses. So in that case, the contraindication is that you might want to be careful in pregnancy of using a lot of this. Some of the lore about lemon balm is also that having it by beehives or rubbing the leaves, in beehives. Some beekeepers do that to try to keep bees from swarming. I don't know if that works really well or not. One thing I can say about the smell of lemon balm, that is therapeutic too, in the aromatherapy kind of sense. Sometimes when I am done with work and I go in through the back way through our house and I pass the lemon balm patch, if I've had a difficult day and I want to have a nice transition to coming home and seeing my kids and my wife, I just go and I rub a leaf and just smell, and then that next minute or two walking into my house is kind of a reset. Some days on a hot day when the volatile oils are really popping, you don't even need to do that. You just walk by and you're like, oh, thank you. So here's some lemon balm pictures. And you might note on there, if you can see it, some of the flowers, they go through these different colors. When they're first emerging, they're kind of yellow, and then they go into a white and pink, and then sometimes they end up as white. If you're harvesting this for medicine, I would harvest it in full flower, and I would do dry it for tea, hanging it upside down. Or if you're making a tincture, I particularly recommend the fresh plant tincture. So it's beyond the scope of this class to describe how to make a tincture, but we have that information. We're going to have it on our pre-recorded classes and stuff, and we do classes on medicine making. But a fresh plant, a tincture is the way to go, and there's ways to prepare it that maximize potency. First and foremost, don't let it oxidize. So if you're making a tincture, chop it up immediately and put it in your solvent or menstruum, which is usually alcohol or water. But you can also do a glycerite. There's part of our lemon balm patch when it's really happy. I can also almost imagine the smell right now. And there's just a close-up of the leaf. And you can see that square stem and those opposite leaves, characteristic of the mint family. So try some lemon balm tea. Some of you are probably old friends with lemon balm. Next up, oat seed. So this is more of a longer term herb. I would call it nutritive. And most of the time when you're taking this, it's something that's felt over time, and even like a leap of faith, like I'm going to take it, I'm going to nourish my nervous system. I have seen some students though, and people react to just drop doses and feel something. So like I said, everybody's different with the nervous system. It's in the grass family, the Poaceae family, and it's called wild oats or milky oats. And I have listed here Avena fatua, but there's also Avena sativa. Both are interchangeable as medicine, and there's about 30 different species, but I know those two. About 2 to 3 feet high. It likes to grow, and it's well distributed, but it's sometimes hard to find. When I was in California and the Rocky Mountains, Colorado, I saw it a lot more than here. Down in the Bitterroot, I will see it, but it's in a tricky place if you're harvesting it, if you're not growing it. It's in between dirt roads and ranches or farms. So that's kind of a suspect place as far as spraying, if you know it's clean or not. When we manufactured oatseed products and stuff and made medicine, we would just, get it from an herb farm that grew it organically. And that's probably the safest way, or to grow it yourself. There's at least two ways to make this medicine for internal use. Of course, it can be soothing as oatmeal, externally for poison oak and skin conditions, but internally, usually do the dry seed or oat straw tea, and that's very nutritive. It's often used with herbs that are what are called alternatives or metabolic balancers, but just good nutritive and high in vitamins and mineral tea. And it is soothing and supportive to the nervous system that way. That's one medicine, and it's really good. The other medicine is to do a tincture of the unripe seed only and in its milky stage. And so when you pinch this little seed, a little white fluid will come out, and I'll have some pictures about that in just a second. That's the stage you want to tincture it in, and fresh seed tincture. And it's a little different medicine, and it's a little stronger. Let's see, what can I say about this? This is what I call that nervous system trophorestorative. In fact, it's probably the one I think of first if I think of that word, nervous system, or nervous system trophorestorative. It's for nervous exhausted people. It's adrenaline stress that's hard to turn off. People who have trained themselves to stay agitated. I think one of my teachers said, still chasing the carrot and they've already eaten it. So you're in patterns with this. Really good for exhaustion that results from that, and that the feeling that you can't organize or get it together. You're easily overwhelmed. Maybe in some people would describe it as expansive and yinny and not grounded. It's also been called medicine for crispy critters. So some of you right now are going, okay, now where do I get this? Because it's pretty common in our society. For long-term use, maybe consider also using it in a formula. It's another herb that goes well in formulas. I like the herbalist Kiva Rose had a really nice quip about it, or description about it. I'll read that to you. She says, good for burned out, mentally overworked, and emotionally underfed culture. So I'll repeat that. Burned out, mentally overworked, and emotionally underfed culture. If you have anxiety and restlessness that's, kind of long term, again, with that lack of focus, and this is worth trying. Most people don't see immediate effects. It's over a bit of time. It's also been used for low libido and sexual lethargy, and that's probably a result of just long-term stress. You're not in the mood. What's interesting about it is you see this marketed sometimes in those kind of formulas that you use, sexual potency formulas, and it's never listed as oat seed. It's always listed as AVENA. And honestly, any herbal product needs to have both the common and Latin or botanical name. But I just think that's kind of funny because, oat seed's not sexy, but AVENA could be. So we're getting a little low on time, so I'm going to speed it up a little bit here. But mental fatigue, inability to focus, and one of the contraindications that's come up that I've never encountered was that, especially of the tincture, that large doses would be cause maybe a little frontal headache. But the dosage for this plant is all over the place. So some say like small, like of the tincture, 10 to 20 drops, small doses. Others say 80 to 100 drops for more effectiveness. And I think it just really comes down to constitution. Like, try this, go low and slow, see how you do with it. I've never personally observed that headache, but it has been written about. And it's a reversible headache. If it gives you a little bit of headache, you just stop it or reduce the dose. So there's no serious side effect with that or anything that's known about. So there is that latex. And right there to squeeze that out, that's the perfect stage. It's the unripe seed if you're making a tincture. There it is there too. And then there's the dry seed, and then at the bottom you'll see that oat straw, and that's a lovely way to take it as well. Next one, blue vervain. It's a little harder to come by in commerce, perhaps. Well, the reason I like to talk about it is it does some specific things that I think are necessary for us to know about. It's in the Verbaceae family. It looks like a mint, but it's not. And this plant can get tall, and it's very impressive. It can get, in our garden, it's gotten to 5 feet easily. I see some questions rolling in, so we're going to get to those real soon. You want to use the above ground part in flower. Not the stem so much. So if you're drying it for tea, then you would just hang it upside down and then strip the leaves and flowers off. But be warned, this is a very, very bitter remedy. And I think it makes a better tincture just because that's easier to, deal with the bitterness. That bitterness is part of its effect. It's so incredibly bitter and grounding that too much of it is nauseating. So it's a little bit lower dose, and fresh herb tincture is the best way to do it, in my opinion. So a word about nervines, you can have a physiological dose. In this case, the dose would be 30 to 90 drops of tincture, or you can have an energetic dose. And that operates on a whole different level. That dose might be 1 to 6 drops. Sometimes that can be more profound, especially in the world of nervines or mood. Sometimes just a few drops of something, you'll like, oh, wow, drop down. It's a little harder to explain, I guess, in this context, but so there is distribution of that. It's easy to grow in gardens. It's not picky. Very bitter. And hepatic means it has an effect on the liver. So that can be good in a way of stimulating liver for function, but also something to know about if you're on, liver medication or medication that is processed in the liver. That's CYP50, P450, CYP450. That certain medications, you're not supposed to eat certain foods and stuff because that medication is processed through the liver, a certain way. So, and diaphoretic again makes you sweat. So this is a mover, what I call an aromatic mover. Like I said, it looks like a mint. It has a smell. Not everyone likes the smell. what I like about this is it is a nervine relaxant. It will sometimes sedate you depending on dose, but also sensitivity and constitution. And if you have a lot of nervous tension, like, your head and neck area, it works better when you have that. It works stronger than when you have something that is, a physical complaint. And then it may or may not be more sedating in that case. Really grounding. But if you take too much, it's almost too grounding and, a little bit nauseating. Not everyone likes the taste. It relieves neuromuscular tension as well as being an antispasmodic. And I really feel like this plant works on what we talked about, the enteric nervous system, that grounding digestive energy. Thing about this plant, it's for those people who are really hyper driven and overexert to burnout. They're not grounded and they need to be grounded. This is for people who make list or people who make list of list. That would be me. And it's not necessarily everyday medicine, but it's really good for transitions too. Let's say, like before, I was talking about going to work and then coming home and then needing to shift. And sometimes that's difficult. Sometimes you can do a little herbal cocktail of a little bit of water and some drops of blue vervain in there, perhaps some skullcap, which we're going to talk about next, and maybe kava, something like that. This is really good for those transitions. Difficulty unwinding at the end of the day. Matthew Wood, who's an herbalist on the East Coast, where he's been an herbalist for a long time, he says verbena hastata, or blue vervain, is indicated in cases where the person is intensely driven but does not have the energy to sustain their drive. It's also a specific for head and neck tension, like that feeling of a weak neck. It's just helps with that too. Some women find relief with hot flashes with this remedy as well. That could be that grounding energy. So we have time, just maybe one more to blaze through. There's blue vervain there, just a lovely plant. So I got to talk about skullcap. I just have to. So SCUTELLARIA, and I apologize, I'm going to have to go fast on this one to get to questions. There's two species that I know of that I've used, and they are in this area. There are many other species that don't all work the same. So don't presume just because you have a SCUTELLARIA that species is effective or even safe to use. There are some SCUTELLARIAs that might be different medicinal or different actions. GALERICULATA is the marsh skullcap. This is the one you're going to find though in commerce, the latter flora. And it's the bigger, easier to grow one. And anti-anxiety. This one, it'll work as a tea or tincture. And I'll have to go quick about this, but I do have something insightful to say about it, I think. It's well renowned as a fresh plant tincture for cutting mind chatter and that, going over stuff and getting stuck on ideas. And, it is listed as being sedating as a tea. So the tincture itself isn't so sedating unless you have nerve pain, but it's more for this being stuck thing that we'll go into in a second. The tea, however, was always listed as being good for insomnia and really relaxing and sedating. I never got anything from that. And I happened upon a trick just by accident that I later verified on reading some obscure thing about it. I was preparing skullcap tea to try to help me sleep, and I had young kids at the time, and I let the water boil, but I wasn't able to pour it on the herb, and I had to go deal with some stuff, some little kid at night thing. I came back and I was like, oh, I'm not going to reheat it, and I poured the water over the tea, and lo and behold, strongly sedating. So instead of boiling water, use warm water, and for whatever reason, it activates it. So try that if you haven't had luck with skullcap. And then I saw someone that validated that by saying like, oh, I use warm water for my skullcap tea. I'm like, wow, gosh, great. So here we have mind chatter. This is good for the emotional stuff that comes with, anxiety or nerve pain. Like you got toothache, you're worried about the, tooth. You have an appointment with the dentist the next day. You're worried about the dentist. You compound things. Takes the edge off pain. It won't put you to sleep unless you can't stop hearing your body and that pain or that discomfort. And so then it kind of deals with that, and you let go and you relax. Outburst of anger. You're on my last nerve, that's skull cap. Really good for parenting too. If the too much sensation, screaming kids, my wife and I would look at each other and go, oh, it's a skull cap moment. It works well if you don't eat sugar and then you eat sugar and then you really feel it. I can attest to that. What else, really quick? I've heard of some people using it to, if they are taking sleeping pills and they're trying to wean from that, as they're doing that, they, just have skull cap at night, and it might, help them a little bit with that. Just one more note, you might see in like WebMD or other places like skullcap is toxic to the liver. Not the case. In the 80s, there was a large supply of skullcap on the market that was adulterated with another plant called germander, which is a known hepatotoxin. That was one incident in the 80s, and still to this day, occasionally you'll see written stuff about it, but it is not a toxic plant to the liver. This also works really great in formulas, and it's just a lovely plant. There's not a lot of it out there though in the wild, so it's good to grow this one. Goodness, time flies when we are having fun. I hope that you all enjoyed this presentation, and I hope it wasn't too fast. And what I really hope is it got you excited about some of these herbs and just, cultivating a relationship. So, lemon balm and oat seed in particular, those are really good herbs to get to know if you are stressed a lot. And I'll just, since I can't see any of you, I'll just wave you bye-bye and good night, and thank you very much.
Thanks for watching. Interested in learning more? We have lots of herbal articles and recipes online.